This is the Lydian Spin with Liddy Lunch and Tim Dahl. Not Tim, you
Yes,
being in Brooklyn
sure.
and me being in Berlin.
Yes.
I just thought we might have a little quiz. Well, first of all, let's
No.
start with this.
Yes,
Because you know me, I'm very much anti water and plastic bottles. You know that.
I know that.
So scientists tested, and we see these commercials all the time, and they're pathetic. Um, Fiji water, like, oh, it's
Oh yeah,
supposed to
that
be
thing.
better. And the thing is, it is more polluted
Because it sits
than
in
tap
plastic
water.
long. I never guessed it actually came from Fiji, the water, or does it? I always thought it was just
Fiji
some.
specifically is what they're testing because they have the most, advertisements, I guess. All right,
Okay.
so I wanted to kind of grill you on some really ridiculous American laws, as if we don't have enough.
Oh
So,
boy.
and you're going to try to guess the states that these are from.
Oh
Okay,
boy. Okay.
where is it that you cannot dress as a member of the clergy? There's only 52 possibilities.
DC?
What?
I don't know. I
Well,
can't
you're
imagine.
okay. All right. How about Alabama?
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. I thought it was gonna be a trick question.
All
That's an
right.
obvious answer.
These
Okay.
are well, these are all trick questions.
Okay.
Where is it that you are not allowed to use silly string? Now, this is a trick question.
Not allowed to use silly string. I mean that's how the hell would I know that one?
Alabama. I'm sorry to make two in a row. I just had to say it.
Is the answer to everyone Alabama?
Hell no, but you might stay
Okay.
with the letter A. How about
Okay.
now? This is an actual law. You can't push a moose out of a moving airplane. Like, how or why could you? This
Well,
is a law.
you can't
Push
push.
a
Well,
moose.
all right. So that would either be Alaska
Yes,
or
correct.
okay.
Once
Okay.
again, Tim Dahl. Okay. Where is it? Again, this is a trick question, so use your mind. You know I'm tricky.
Sure, sure, sure.
Kids cannot build snowmen taller than they are.
All right. Well, the California, Montana,
There's no
Alaska.
snowmen building in California.
Well, yes, there
No,
are. Yes, there are. There's in the mountains. There's a lot of snow, and I thought
Tim.
California is
I
pretty
told you it
litigious.
was a trick question. What was the previous answer?
Alaska and
Hello,
Montana.
thank you.
Okay, okay, all right.
Alaska.
Well,
All
that makes
right
sense. That makes
now.
sense. That makes sense because
All right
the
now.
population.
You
Okay, keep
know
on
I
going,
have a fondness for
please.
donkeys
Yes, you do.
because most of my friends are fucking asses. But I'm just saying. Now, where is it that there is an actual law that a donkey cannot sleep in a bathtub? I mean, why is this even on the law? But
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saying, even
Florida.
if the donkey is your favorite character
Uh,
and
um,
you're
um,
invested to fill out your dreams, you
Hold
cannot
on, hold
take
on.
a nap with a donkey. Where? The bathtub in what?
South Carolina. Um,
No,
I
I'm
mean,
kind of going alphabetically down the line. So that
oh,
would be,
oh, okay. So it would be a B.
no, we're not there yet.
We're still in A's. All right, Alabama.
How about
Uh,
Arizona? I
uh,
mean, Arizona is ridiculous, but I didn't know you couldn't put a donkey in the bathtub.
I mean,
All
yeah.
right,
What's why?
who the fuck knows? Now, how about no honking near a sandwich shop after 9 p.m.? Like, I mean, what? Why? Where? What?
No
We're
honking.
still we're still in the A's, by the way.
Arkansas.
Correct. Now,
All right. Okay.
don't honk through it. Don't honk at a drive-through. We're still in the A's.
Oh boy, can't
Trick
don't
question.
honk
Come
it.
on.
All right. So
You
we're
said it already, Tim.
Alabama.
No, no,
Uh, Arkansas,
hello.
Alaska.
All right. Okay. I'll give you 2.5 points for that.
All right.
All right. Now, this is really ridiculous because this is a pretty progressive state, but you cannot eat frogs that die in a frog jumping contest.
Vermont.
Beyond the A's and B's.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, this is so ridiculous. You wouldn't even think this state has that rule, considering you could probably, shoot somebody at the In-N-Out Burger and get away with it.
So we're still on the A's, and all right.
Well, through the A's and B's.
All right.
All right, you're failing, Tim. Tim,
I'm
this is
failing.
the hardest test you've ever been on.
I mean,
How about C?
California.
Oh, how about women can't operate a car while wearing a house coat? What the hell? I mean, considering the fashion in this state, which goes from, Gucci to, oh, God, no, you would not think it was actually a law. Women wishing to remain comfortable in garb must remove their house coats before operating their vehicles.
New Jersey.
We haven't gotten that far in the alphabet.
So the whole thing's alphabetical order?
I'm tricking you. California. Can you imagine? Who's going to know if you're wearing a fucking house coat or a tracksuit made by Gucci? I would not know.
What is the reason behind that? Do you have any reasons?
Absolutely.
Makes no sense. I'm not doing that well on this one. But I mean, how would I know? I would know.
But men can wear their bathrobes while driving. It seems.
Well, yeah, exactly. Hugh Hef, exactly.
Yeah. Well, there you go. All right. Okay.
Yes.
This one is tricky.
Please.
And it involves what? Pickles, because pickles must bounce. Now, you know that one of my favorite recent films is what? Puss in Boots 2. Why? Pickles. But I'm a legend. Okay, what state would say that pickles, I guess that would be me, must bounce?
Well, so I would think about who, so if we're in this alphabetical order thing, I might be screwed in this one, but intuitively, I think about the states that probably have the most pickle culture. And I think that would be the New York City area or Chicago area, and an industrialized pick.
On the alphabet. Let me just say this: fermented cucumbers have to obey strict laws in this northeastern state. The pickle law stems from a 1948 criminal case where two farmers sold pickles that did not bounce.
Connecticut.
Correct. You do know everything. All right. How about well, more with silly string. Okay, selling animal hair is illegal. I'd love to sell some of my hair because I shed so much and I have to cut it every 2 weeks.
So this is all
why is selling animal hair is illegal? I mean, what does that mean? It doesn't mean the skins. It just means their hair. And it's also the state where you can't sell artificial limbs to pawn shops. Come
Florida.
on, alphabet. We're not there yet.
Oh, so we're sorry. So we're in C's, maybe D's.
Come on,
Delaware.
You are a genius. I knew it. So just remember, don't sell your artificial limbs to any pawn shops in Delaware. I mean, now we know Florida is the most ridiculous state in the union, just about, because we never have more information than what comes from that state.
Correct.
All right. I'm just going to give you this one. Florida, did you know that men cannot wear strapless dresses? Florida stresses its ignorance toward gender expression by preventing men from wearing strapless dresses.
Is that a new law? Is that a new law? I wonder if that's like some DeSantis shit.
But the law specifically applies to strapless dresses. But other dresses don't attract the cops' attention.
You can have strap-on dresses, but not strapless. Okay.
Well, when I strap one on, it's usually under my vest, I must admit.
Oh.
Well, whatever. Anyway, I just thought I would. Okay. This one is very weird, but I think this should be mandatory, and I would reduce the number. No more than 15 dogs or cats in one house. Has anybody ever seen fucking hoarders? Jesus, they often die and then just attract rats and bugs.
Georgia.
Keep going down the list. Anyway, it's bizarre because, I mean, why is this even a law? I guess because people are stockpiling pets.
I mean, that maybe a high density state like
maybe a state that doesn't want ticks and pollution and hoarders because its natural resources are so beautiful. It's down the alphabet a bit. I'm just saying.
Down the alphabet a bit. I mean, there's a lot of beauty all over the country. Down the
Well,
alphabet a bunch.
I'm just going to give it to you.
Please,
Because
please.
you're not going to guess it. I know you're not.
Okay. All right.
Hawaii.
What is it?
But wait a minute here. Now I just come up with something really bizarre. You can only eat other people sometimes. Wait a minute. What? I don't know if you saw the movie Bones and all, or
Cannibalism's legal in the state, in other words, is what you're saying?
Well, according to a certain state law, humans can legally eat other humans, granted extreme damage threatens their lives. What? Now, this is really weird because, I mean,
Texas.
I don't even know what exists in this fucking state other than the possibility of eating other people.
Oh, so, hold on. I got this. Colorado.
We're way down below that. Tim, we've already gone.
Wyoming.
We're not that far. Come on. H, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H,
Idaho.
Thank you. Finally. All right.
That makes sense. No, that makes sense because of all the, the pioneer culture, and you get trapped in a snowstorm going over a mountain, and sometimes you got to eat a person. I was going west.
You know, Tim, you're making me think about one of my favorite songs, Timothy. Where on earth did you go? About trapped in a mine, no food to eat. The only ones left alive were me and Sam and Tim. And what did they do? They ate Tim, and that was not in Idaho. I'm just saying. Anyway, I just thought I'd give you a little quiz because I
like the quiz. I always like the quiz. This one was this was a tough one. I have to admit that was a tough one.
Well,
I'm gonna ask you one question. Do you know what CWISEJ 1249 is? You're never going to get this.
I would love to know the answer, but no, I'm not going to guess.
It's an object that has been identified by NASA, and it's moving. Estimated, they don't know what.
A million miles an hour.
Million miles an hour, and the density is so low they don't. It's not a star. They don't know what it is. It's about 20. It's exactly 27,306 times the size of Earth. And
I might not have known its name, but I knew how fast it was moving because that's what we do here at the Lydian Spin.
Yes, we do.
We calculate time and we realize the time is running out, or the time has come today, or the time it is a changing, or time is flexing like a whore, falls wanking to the floor. And with that, I'm just going to close out and say, Timothy Dahl in Brooklyn, Lydia Lunch in Berlin. That's what we do.
That's what we do.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Talk to you again soon. Very soon. Thank you, Sebastian. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, and our special guest is Travis Jeppesen, who I was introduced to by Slava, a good friend of ours from the podcast as well. Yep. And Travis is not only a world traveler, but a novelist of some import. His latest book, which is, 800 or 900 pages, which he'll be reading a bit for us tonight. And I just want to welcome him. We're both in Berlin. Tim's in Brooklyn. And
I'm back in Brooklyn.
All over the globe. How you doing, Travis?
I'm doing okay. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Lydia, for inviting me. And Tim, it's lovely to meet you.
Likewise.
So, Travis, I want to just go back in time a little bit. So you were born in Florida. We have a lot of stories about Florida, but mainly you grew up in North Carolina.
I did. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and lived there first 18 years of my life until I made my successful escape. I dashed away to New York City. And
can I ask you a question? Is Charlotte, Carolina, North Carolina, every time I go there, I'm like, there's like this banking city. It feels like a cultural desert. Am I wrong? I just, it's so confusing to me.
You're not wrong. It's Charlotte is the biggest city in North Carolina. And but it's not the cool capital of North Carolina. That's right. To be sure. It's a
what
big
is the cool capital?
I would say now, probably, I don't know. Asheville. Yeah, I've been away for so
Raleigh,
long.
maybe Raleigh, or maybe.
Well, Tim and I have been to Asheville a few times. Kramer of Shimmy Disc is now living outside of Asheville. We love Fleetwood's in Asheville, and but I do love the South. But Travis, I have to ask you. I mean, before you went to the new school, I mean, you must have been eating all kinds of literature in order to find to know what you wanted to do. We were previously talking about Tennessee Williams, etc. So, what were you feasting on as a young upstart in North Carolina?
Yeah, so I was like a theater kid. I was a theater geek. And so yeah, I mean like I kind of like started off as like a child actor, but then I was started as I grew into a teenager, I was reading, I was getting into more like edgier stuff, I guess you could say, like Edward Albee and Tennessee Williams and stuff like that. And then yeah, then I started getting into like more, trying to like seek out more experimental things, which in Charlotte, North Carolina, even though there was like a kind of like a theater scene, that kind of realm was inaccessible. It didn't exist. And I don't know, I guess like the big moment for me, I mean, this is kind of like how I first started writing. I started writing plays. And I remember like the first big moment for me, I remember reading a play in an anthology by Kathy Acker.
So you were a theater kid, and then you found more transgressive stuff like Kathy Acker, and which, let's face it, plays are really different. It's a very unique form of creation, and it can be so involving or just so boring.
Yeah, no shit. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, I remember, so I read this, I picked up this anthology of plays from like downtown New York, and I found this play by Kathy Acker, Blood of the Poet. I think it's one of the few plays that she wrote. And, and this had like stage directions, like, and then the theater explodes and the entire audience dies. And that's when I realized, like, oh, wow, like, in my adolescent brain, I was thinking, wow, you're allowed to do that? Wow, And
Yeah.
so yeah, the plays that I started writing became more and more extreme. I started a theater company when I was a teenager to produce the plays that I was writing. And, and they became like they were becoming like more extreme, crazier and crazier. And then one play that I staged, like it ended like, there ended up being like a fist fight between one of the audience members and one of the actors in the middle of the play, and the police were called and everything, and the show was shut down. And then,
Wait. Back up 1 second.
Yeah.
Was there a staged fist fight, or was it just accidentally happen and then the police come in?
It was totally accidental, because it was just kind of like it was the staged moment of violence where an audience member became involved. I don't know. He was probably drunk, drunk assholes.
I've had the deal.
Yeah. And and so like the plays that I was writing became like more and more extreme. And then at a certain point, I just realized like maybe I'm no longer writing plays. Maybe I'm writing, poetry and stories, prose poetry, really indeterminate texts. And so yeah, it just kind of like ballooned and blossomed.
And so going to the new school, I mean, did that? I mean, your vision was already expanded because you were already looking in the dark corners of literature and playwriting. So you hightail it to the new school. What did that do? And then how did the format of your writing change at that point?
Going to the new school, I guess like I got in like a year early, so I got to skip my last year of high school, which was great because I was so miserable. I just wanted to escape that place and get to New York City as soon as possible. And I guess like when what this sort of like formal education taught me is it enabled me to get like deeper into literature and discover different traditions in which I might ground myself, and because I was so chaotic at that point as a young writer, it taught me, like, in a way, how, form could be, my friend as well. Like, it didn't need to be like completely like
abstract,
and formless. Yeah, you could enlist form and structure in a way to
accelerate the point.
Yeah, exactly. And to make things like, just as interesting and just as like fucked up as what I had been doing. And that like led to my first novel, Victims, which I finished when I was 22 or 23.
And what was that about?
So that kind of grew out of my obsession with Heaven's Gate, the religious cult.
Oh, yes. The Heaven's the ones where they did a mass castration.
Yeah, well, yeah. Among other things, they did castration.
Do I need to check to see if you're castrated or not? How closely were you related to investigating this cult? I think you're fully loaded. I'm just imagining.
Yeah.
At least. Okay.
Yeah. I am fully loaded. Yeah. Not that that's something that I'm proud of.
I'm proud for you, son.
Yeah.
So Heaven's Gate, what made you so interested? I mean, because look, cults are insanity personified and condensed. So what specifically about Heaven's Gate drew you to writing a book about it?
So at the New School, I became really interested in literature, philosophy, various forms of ideology. And what fascinated me about Heaven's Gate is they really invented their own religion. They and they wrote like their own book. They invented their own Bible.
Were they Raelians? Were they no, or is that something else? Raelians? Were they?
No, that's something else.
That's something else.
But they're the ones with a spaceship on the other side of the asteroid or something that was going to come and get them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But they really believed that they were going to become like rescued by the spaceship that was going to take them away.
It's the Raelians, yeah.
Give them a new body in which they would exist in what they called like the next level of existence.
The desperation of the human race never fails to disappoint me.
Yeah. Well, there was something at the same time very poignant, very beautiful about the fact that, they believed in this to the extent to which they didn't believe they were committing suicide. They were getting They were getting rid of their bodies, and they would be giving a new body for this next level.
And is that any more ridiculous than just believing in heaven in general?
No, it's all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the whole thing, is that like, any more ridiculous than believing that, there's like Jesus Christ is going
you mean granddad in a toga in the sky who murders his own son, which condemns you to unholy hell if you do something he doesn't like? Please.
Yeah, exactly.
What did I say the other night? As is one of my mantras, God was the first cop.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah. So
cop or cock?
Both cock and cop.
Okay.
Clarify.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
What? Well, anyway.
Is that a musical? Is that a musical?
It's the coming musical. So when you're at the New School and you say you're studying, you're getting more immersed in all the new and different and ideology and philosophy. Who really spoke to you at that point?
Oh God!
Who was?
Can I guess? Can I guess?
Go ahead.
Because I was checking out, doing research. Are you a huge Beckett person?
Yeah. I mean, Beckett. Yeah. Ever since I was a teenager, I was a huge fan of Beckett.
I can't go on.
Well, no, because I want to know about, and I don't want to jump too quickly, but the whole object-oriented writing, because he has a play or book I read once, The Lost Ones, it's like an 80-page piece, and it's like this object that he talks about in circles. It's painstaking. It's almost violent, even though it's subjective and detailed.
And I want to suggest to you one of my favorite books is called The Secret Life of Inanimate Objects. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's not a philosophy, but it's about the import of the elemental existence of inanimate objects. So
Yeah.
tell us about that, since Tim has taken the reins and thrown us into the objectification of your object obsession.
Yes.
Right. So object-oriented writing. So that's like jumping ahead a few years.
Oh,
So
wait,
like,
go back
sorry.
and forth.
all right, yeah, let's
Yeah,
go back and forth. Why not? Yeah.
Because our writing knows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So around the time that like this novel was published, I started writing about art, and as a lot of like poor poets and fiction writers do, there's this whole tradition going back like, really centuries to, Diderot in France and Baudelaire, all these like poets and who would write about art really kind of for a paycheck, but also
or Miller, who would write about pornography for a paycheck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I started writing about art for magazines to support myself. And
Well, by the way, how did you even get gigs about writing for art to support yourself? Did you just submit things? Did you solicit? Did somebody suggest?
Here we have to skip ahead a few years.
Okay.
After like I graduated college and like I ran away to Europe and I was living in Prague, and I started there were a lot of expats living in Prague during this time, and so I started writing for like a lot of English language media, and and they were like, well, what can you do? And I was like, well, I'm interested in art. I want to write about art. And so that's what I started to do.
You'd already had written some novels at this point.
Yeah,
and by the way, Czech is the place that has published all of my books and translated them, including my cookbook. It's the place, for some reason, they're really
they're into it.
understanding of literature.
And Havel is a massive literature guy, and he's always inviting authors and giving them awards and stuff from all over the world. So they
okay. So first of all, what made you go to Prague? Because we've also played there many times, and I'm always happy that any country wants to publish my books, much less all of them in the language.
Right. So
what year was that also that you went to Prague?
So I went to Berlin for a year, 2001 to 2002. Then Victims came out, and I got like a tiny advance, and I had some friends living in Prague. And so I was like, let me go and visit. And then I ended up staying for 4 years. And
places call to us sometimes.
Sometimes they call to us.
Yeah. I mean, other than the black triangle of death, the pollution in Prague, which can be very heavy.
Yeah. But
it's a beautiful place.
We might have some mutual friends. We might have some mutual friends. I knew a bunch of American expats living there at the time. But
probably do. Yeah.
So keep on going.
So I found myself like writing about art, and they used to have this great art magazine there called Umělec, which is artist in Czech, and they were just like very anarchic because they were very conscious of the fact that the rest of the art world doesn't give a shit about Eastern Europe, so we can do whatever we want in this magazine. And so they were publishing like, most art criticism is quite dull, quite boring, but they were publishing.
Most art is quite dull and quite boring, let's face it.
Yeah, let's be honest. Yeah. And so and so they were like quite intrigued by someone who was coming along who was like more of like, I guess, a literary wild bent. And so and so I started writing about art, but like, and so I did this for like many years. This is how I made a living. And
when you said you started writing about art, what kind of art? What? Modern, contemporary, visual, paintings, performance? What drew you first to try to get a paycheck for writing about it?
Yeah, I was writing mostly about like Czech contemporary artists, and there were like a lot of like really wild younger artists who were doing kind of like more outsider stuff. And and like I was drawn to the challenge of just trying to find, because when you write about art, it's essentially like an act of translation. What drew me to the form is like, it's the most difficult form of writing there is, because you're trying to translate from one language, which is like a purely visual, non-linguistic language, into something like, with actual words.
The hardest thing I ever wrote was an introduction about Ron Apey, one of my favorite artists, because that was the most difficult thing I've ever written, and really beautiful, but it really was painstaking because it's exactly what you said. You're trying to translate one language into another language to try to bring the concept of what it is into a concept that other people can maybe
and it's beyond the concept of even translation from one language to the other one, because spoken language and written language that we're communicating in the form that we're communicating in do have not all, there's cultural differences in the translation process, but there's also a lot of literal translations that you can do. Something as abstract as art or music or dance or into words, that's a much greater or more difficult interface, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a burden, and it's also a luxury when you read something that really can help you to understand something you might not have seen when you saw it. So it's very important. I mean, I don't give a shit about criticism, but I do care when somebody comes along and can maybe illustrate something that even the artist themselves hasn't recognized in what they're doing. Yeah. Because they're coming at it from a different perspective.
I completely agree. Like, the best reviews that I've ever read about my own work, like, even if they're bad reviews, if they're good or bad, it's always like when the person like recognizes something that I myself didn't realize.
Well, and we were speaking earlier about Matthew McConaughey, and I saw him today on Hot Ones, the show where they eat, very hot chicken wings, hotter, until 10 wings. Yes. And he was saying that for a while he was collecting all the worst reviews he could find of himself so that he could learn something, and not that it even horrified him, but that he could then see, like, you can disregard. I mean, I don't read anything about myself because I know what I am. I'm just saying. And I don't write things about other people too much anymore because I know how I feel.
I often find the good reviews more offensive than the bad reviews. Because the bad reviews, if they're smart, you can get something from it. You can also just totally disagree. It doesn't matter. Well, in a weird way, a bad review is someone who cares more.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say the best review I've ever had was from a psychotherapist about one of my spoken word things. But also, Tim, and at one of our recent shows with the Big Sexy Noise Revival, a very young gal who kind of tried to understand my patter between songs, but was still kind of offended, but couldn't resist it at the same time, was interesting to me because I forget what a fucking harsher I am because I think I'm the nicest person on earth. Alan, what earth are we talking about? Doesn't matter. We're going to go back to you now, honey bunny.
Yeah. So object-oriented writing, it was, eventually, I started writing for bigger publications, Art in America, Art Forum, but I found
now, would you decide on a subject and then say, I want to write about this and just send it to them? Or how would that even happen? How did you end up writing for Art Forum?
Well, I was, somebody recommended me, this guy who eventually became my agent for a little while. And, because they were at this point, I had moved back to Berlin.
Because you're a nomad.
Yeah.
We'll go into all the places you've lived shortly.
Exactly. And there's a big art world in Berlin. And so, yeah.
Just the reason I'm here and the reason why Tim Dahl and I will be at Hamburger Bahnhof on September 12th.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to.
I can't wait to have you there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I started to think why this schizophrenia? Why is it that that I'm writing in two different voices, two different registers? Yeah. There's this critical voice when I'm writing art criticism, and then there's my so-called creative voice,
which also has many voices within it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
you might be one of the top schizophrenic writers right now on the planet. Well, and that is a high compliment coming from a musical schizophrenic.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. And so with object-oriented writing, it was just my effort, let's fuse these two modes, so-called critical writing and so-called creative writing. Let's eradicate this artificial border that exists between these two different modes of writing. And so with object-oriented writing, it was I did this project called 16 Sculptures, where it was it was like I selected 16 sculptures randomly from throughout the history of art. And
where was that? That was at a major museum in New York, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in the Whitney Biennial,
which I have to say they've been very nice to me in the past as well. So
yeah.
So all right, so it was 16 sculptural objects that you chose.
Yeah.
And then there was this. Was this the exhibition that people had to be blindfolded to hear your audio recitation?
Yeah, sure. So like I wrote the texts kind of like, the whole idea is like, like if these like sculptures, if they could like speak, what would they say? And so like I wrote these 16 texts, and then we did recordings of them with a friend of mine who's a musician based here in Berlin. And
then people were blindfolded with headphones.
Yeah, the idea
you're
is
speaking to the objects.
Yeah, I was like trying to say like what the objects would say. So it was kind of like, it was this kind of hybrid form that was kind of like, I guess you could say like half criticism, but half poetry.
And translation again of the concept. And what's interesting to me is, as opposed to a review or a criticism or an accolade of an artist, it's of the object. And again, back to the secret life of inanimate objects, which exactly. And we know that's why we collect whatever it is we collect. Some of us have obsessive collections of certain things. Why do they speak to us and what do they say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, like in a way, I was kind of like approaching the art object as like a nature poet would approach like a landscape, and trying to not just write about the thing from the outside, but trying to evoke the essence of the thing from the inside.
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, the Japanese
invocation versus like, just boring critical like analysis, like well,
and that brings me to this. I mean, obviously, because these objects meant something, therefore you're speaking for them. Were you ever assigned, or did you ever decide to critique or translate something you didn't like?
Mm-hmm. Nice.
In all of life, because I like to espouse everything that annoys me, but that's how I get paid.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like some of the sculptural works I selected, perhaps I didn't really like them, but I mean,
but they spoke to you, or you spoke for them.
Yeah, but I tried to like suspend judgment and like, and and I'm like really drawn to things as well that, I mean, like, the whole issue of like good and bad, that's something that like really intrigues me as well. I wrote this book called like Bad Writing because I'm really drawn to like bad writing and bad art, or people.
Jim's drawn to bad music often.
Well,
so
Albert
I understand.
Albert Olin. Albert Olin, who's a friend of mine who was on the podcast, has a whole thing about being. He's German, bad painting, and he has a whole series. Gagosian represents him.
Well,
this is a whole thing,
And I'm going to recommend one of my favorite pieces of writing called Chunk Space by Rem Koolhaas, the amazing Dutch architect, who has a piece that's like 10 pages long, a run-on sentence about bad architecture. So, and I know some of my early reviews of things, which are so caustic, they burn your eyes when you read them. I no longer do that.
But also, so I'm going to go into this because a lot of the Japanese believe that inanimate objects have souls, and they're just like a mammal, like a human. This desk also has a soul, or this.
And it's also, and it goes to the point of why do we collect what we collect? And some people, it could be Star Wars figurines, it could be marble objects, it could be, and I know that I've had various over different periods in my life things that I would collect. Now, as a nomad, you have to really restrict what you collect to make it very specific to the fact that you might want to keep this somewhere in storage, in a suitcase, how you're going to transport this. But that's also interesting, like what at certain points in your life is the object that you want to collect. And as a nomad, is there anything that like obsesses you now to collect? Other than people?
Yeah.
Which is why we're here tonight.
Yeah. Just experiences, I would say, like, it become like really, because of like my nomadism, I guess, like, I'm just really not into material culture at all, and just like really into
experience as right. And you've and speaking of your travel, because you've been to many places that most, I mean, for instance, North Korea. Can we speak about you going to North Korea for a minute? Because other than Dennis Rodman, I don't know anybody who's been there. And I don't know him, so I'm just saying.
Lisa Link,
how did that happen? What did you do there? What was the what was the experience? What was the point?
So it started, I have a friend who's a travel writer, Tom Masters. He works for like Lonely Planet, the travel guides, and he lives here in Berlin. And we were out one night at a bar, and he just mentioned like, oh, I have to go back to North Korea to update the North Korea chapter and the South Korea guide of Lonely Planet. And I was like, wait, what a minute? Yeah. Because up to that point, I had no idea that it was possible to visit North Korea.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he was like, yeah, I'm going back like next spring. Do you want to go with me? And I was
enter at your own risk. Yikes. Great.
Yeah. And so I went with him, and that was at that point, like it was still possible for Americans to go as tourists to North Korea.
Amazing. What year was that?
That was 2012. And that was like the beginning of like this 5-year obsession for me, where I ended up going like 5 or 6 times over a 5-year period. The last 2 times I ended up going there as a student. I enrolled at a university on this short-term Korean language course, just because I became so obsessed. Because like the first time that I went there, it was just kind of like, more questions than answers. Now it's no longer possible for Americans to go there as tourists. Every other nationality,
in spite of the fact that Donald Trump had beautiful love letters from.
Yeah, exactly. They had beautiful love letters. They might have even had gay sex. We don't really know.
Yeah,
but they met in Singapore.
Do either of them really have sex? I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. What, Tim? Sorry.
Didn't they met in like Malaysia or Singapore?
Singapore.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
that was a disaster.
So I mean, okay. Did you find any kindred spirits in North Korea? Because it must be so difficult to be radical there, because I mean it's so strict. I mean, we have no idea also. So tell us, as the infiltrator, what did you meet any radical like-minded kindred spirits, or maybe the whole country, but they just can't say it?
Right, yeah. So traveling there, it's not like traveling to a normal country. It's normal, of course, and quote unquote, yeah. So you can't like wander around freely on your own. You have
to have a guide.
You have 2 North Korean guides and a driver who accompany you everywhere. Who, not coincidentally, this is exactly how tourism was in the Soviet Union during the Soviet period. You could go as a tourist, but you were always accompanied. So this is how it was. The last 2 times I was there, when I went as a student, I had this guide, and she had grown up in Cuba because her parents were were working for the North Korean embassy in Cuba. So she was one of the only North Koreans that I met that had like this really good idea of what the outside world was like, because
right,
yeah, because
it's banned. You can't, right?
Sure, I mean, because Cuba, it's a communist country, but it's relatively open compared to other countries, compared to North Korea.
Yeah.
And so I mean, like a lot of I ended up writing a book about my experiences called See You Again in Pyongyang, and a big part of it is just kind of like about her and getting to know her, and how she had to kind of reconcile, going back to North Korea after having these experiences of the outside world.
Well, and even though, I mean, Cuba being freer than North Korea, I mean, and that's kind of interesting, because what did I open my speech with the other night? Freedom is just a hallucination.
Right.
It's just a hallucination. It is what you make it. And with that in mind, why don't we have a little reading from your latest book?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about that for a second. So This came out recently. I'm looking at it now. I don't know, is it 893 pages? Please tell me.
800, like the manuscript was like 1,200 pages. The published version is 822.
Okay, I didn't have a chance to read it all since we met a few days ago. Thank you, Slava. But here we are with the connective tissue on the Lydian spin. Do you need your glasses?
No, I've got
Okay, all right. So, with no further ado, just announce yourself and the book that you're reading.
Yeah, so this is from my new novel. It's called Settler's Landing. And I'm just going to read the first few pages of, the introduction, which sets the scene. Chapter 1, Confusion, it's called. Well, let's just say there was a confusion of ideals. No one could quite determine the exact tenor of the era, though that did not prevent the many from their efforts at articulation, damned though they might be. A whole new phraseology was required. The old language just wouldn't do. Everything was simplified into neo this, alt that. Post seemed much too complex and worrisome a prefix. The world was posh and impoverished, somehow both at once. Violence so tightly woven into the fabric of the daily, hardly anyone noticed real instances of mass murder anymore. Far too frequent, they had become the norm. Stains on the carpeting, drops of blood running down. The news, anywho, was left to be categorized as real or fake. What to believe? The real? What's that? We couldn't quite figure it out. Perhaps we didn't genuinely want to. So comfortable in the state of confusion had we ultimately been settled. Buying things helped, certainly made us feel better. The algebra of want and need had become so variegated, so sophisticated in its molding by internal forces, so as to resemble a sort of arcane calculus. Suddenly we felt the acute bodily need for things that hadn't even existed 5 years prior, attachments and extensions to our being, without which we might very well fail to endure. More than anything, you could say, the thing we needed was for all that pain to disappear. Why did the chicken cross the road? To reach the other side of the void. People began doing heroin, and not even rock stars, hicks and suburbanites, high school kids, housewives. The emptiness was vast, enswathing an entire generation, a degeneration of ideals, yes. What the fuck, we might imagine a future historian throwing their hands in the air and asking, were we to sincerely fathom such a thing as a future, much less come to dwell in one? The headlines were no longer epigrammatic and inferential, deferential to the reader's presumed intelligence in the seductive way of years long past, but written in blunt, declarative, and often instructive sentences, rife with skepticism about its intended audience's literacy level and attention span, and for good reason, in all likelihood. It's not about fun, it's about survival. Or, here's the real reason, X did Y. Or, reading this will make you laugh, cry, moan, squeal, puke. Yes, they also had a whiny undertone so as to appeal to that anxious malaise everyone was pressed into absorbing by the mediated noise machine surrounding. No room for subtle metaphor or poetic evocation here. Just the cold, cruel, bitter bluntness that might stand some chance of rippling the synapses of the overly medicated.
Fantastic. And by the way,
Well
I did recognize a reference because one of my favorite lines of all of his many books is The Algebra of Need by William Burroughs. And you, I believe, said The Algebra of Want of Need. And if that is a reference I saw, fantastic.
Well done.
Unconscious, probably, but yeah.
Well,
I'm a Burroughs fan as well.
Well,
so I probably
I'm a fan of his death, I must say. But then again, any white man that dies, I'm all in praise of. So that's from your latest non-novel. I wouldn't call it a novel because it's very schizophrenic. It's 823 pages. There is a concept running through it. And that chapter sets up, because basically it's about really this search for something that doesn't exist by somebody that has everything and wants more. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So
I did that well.
Yeah. So it's a novel. It's about a billionaire. It's about a billionaire who buys his own private island, as billionaires are wont to do, so I've been told. But he decides to take things one step further and start his own country. And
why don't us, the impoverished artists, do exactly that?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. Well, I mean, we are in the Coney Island of the mind, to quote.
Well, and also, country states from where they are now, those are already obsolete. These are just imaginary lines to contain revolution and populations. It's major cities of commerce that are really running this show here, for better or for worse.
So not only North Korea have you ventured into as a wandering literary nomad, which, by the way, is very relatable to, the Beats, who influenced me only by their lifestyle more so than their writing, who were nomadic, drug, adult sex freaks. I'm not saying I'm either of those, but I am a nomad, like you are a nomad. North Korea, but then also, where else did you venture?
I spent 3 years in China, where I got a gig teaching at a university in Shanghai.
Which to me is just amazing. So what were you teaching? And how did you even land that gig? You are so crafty.
Yeah. So
very crafty.
Yeah. I did a PhD in critical writing and art and design at the Royal College of Art in London from 2011 to 2016. That's when I was developing the object-oriented writing stuff. And and I was, at that point I was going back and forth between London and Berlin to do my PhD, but I had been in Berlin for so long at that point that I was like, it's time to escape. It's time for a new adventure. And
was getting a PhD important to you, knowing that might be able to take you to other places, or you just I'm going for it, that's it? What was the point?
Yeah.
As a 10th grade dropout, I must ask.
Yeah. So it was, it was kind of practical. It was a little bit I've been a freelancer my whole life. I've been scraping by, one day I'm going to have to teach. In order to teach, you have to have at least a master's degree. And so I applied to this master's program at the Royal College of Art in London. And they were dude, you've published 5 however many books at that point. They were you're way more advanced than most of our master's students. Why don't you, in the UK, you can skip and just do directly a PhD. And there's no, unlike the US, you don't have to take any classes. You're just you propose a project, a thesis, and then you write it. And so I was okay, so I had an idea for a book. And so I was so I'll just propose this idea for this book that I'm going to write anyway, and then get a PhD in the process. And so and it worked.
That's really fucking clever.
Yeah.
That's really clever.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
No, that's extremely clever. But did you think, okay, I'm going to get the PhD and then I can go wherever I want? Or did you just I have to get this because it's the next step in my progress?
Yeah, it's the next step. And so maybe I can land an academic gig and then not,
which we know
not
doesn't pay that well anyway, but whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Better than making nothing.
I was a little naive at the time. I thought I'm going to this is the pathway to gold. Yeah.
Pathway to further poverty, you mean?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
That's what we learn in the end.
Yeah. So like, when I was going to North Korea a lot over this like 5-year period, the only way to go through North Korea is through China. And so I simultaneously became like very interested and into like Chinese culture, Chinese art, Chinese aesthetics. And
Which, by the way, is not one thing, because I mean, China is, first of all, humongous, and second of all, extremely diverse.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, I became exactly like enthralled by the largeness of it, and like the complexity of it,
and the mystery.
Yeah. And so I applied for some jobs in China, and then I landed this in Shanghai.
I can't even imagine. Tim Dahl, you want to apply for a job in China? He did it. We did.
Yeah. Well,
I can't even imagine. Go ahead.
Well, this was like, I landed there in the magical year of 2019. We all know what happened next in 2020. And so, so it went downhill from there, let's say. Yeah.
How did you handle the pandemic? How did you feel during the shutdown period?
Were you in China when the shutdown happened?
Yeah, I was in Shanghai, and I mean, like, the really interesting thing that happened was when Wuhan happened, they closed Wuhan off really, really fast. And so you couldn't travel from Wuhan to other parts of China.
But you could to other countries.
However, you could get on an airplane and go to London. Yeah, so that's kind of how COVID spread.
Did you get COVID?
Not in China. So
I never had it, but
so I
didn't get it there.
Yeah, so I was in Shanghai, a city of 24 million people, and in the first couple of years, 6 people died of COVID.
That's
meanwhile,
it.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile,
that's what they reported.
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought as well. Like, but nobody was getting it. Nobody I knew got it. Right. And at one point, like, I went to my doctor in Shanghai for like a routine checkup, and my doctor was American. And I was like, do you really believe that only 6 people have died? Like, it's bullshit, right? And she was like, well, no, actually, I do believe it, because the
containment.
Well, because she said, like, I work in a hospital, and like they can't conceal that, like, like,
amazing.
And so it really, like, the first couple of years, while in the US and Italy, Europe, everywhere else, while people were hooked up to machines and dying, in China and Shanghai.
By the way, still spreading now, especially in the States.
Yeah. So it was only in like 2022 when what was that, like, super contagious variant that was like very
I can't keep up with them. I can't keep up.
It started to spread. So that, like, and that was the year that Xi Jinping, when they were going to have like the big Communist Party conference where he was going to be like anointed like emperor for life. Right. And so that started to spread in Shanghai. And then they had this like massive, insane lockdown, which like, I was living on this tiny, like, I was living in Shanghai in this like alleyway, and they built up walls on each side of the alleyway so that nobody could enter or exit. A lot of people ended up dying during that lockdown, like not from COVID, but from like, people having heart attacks, and like ambulances couldn't come to take them away.
Right. Lack of resources.
People who were diabetic couldn't get their medicine. And so like, and so at that point, and it had already become, it was getting under Xi Jinping, things were getting more and more extreme. Like, there were surveillance cameras in all of the classrooms in the university.
Well, and what's interesting is, I mean, the amount of information there and America must have been so different. And also when you're in, I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, in China, the information is limited, like Korea or like many places. The information is limited to what they want you to know.
That's true, yeah. But I mean, you can, like, everybody uses like a VPN, because so much of the internet is blocked.
Life, yeah.
Right. So
I know I'm bad. I know my name itself is like does not compute in China.
Well, I found out when I was there that all of my books are banned in China.
Well,
and I was like, how the fuck did I get like a teaching gig when all my and what you find out is like people don't, unless you're like actively researching like, oh, how can I get this guy's books?
Right.
They don't really realize that until that moment.
Well, speaking of books, why don't we have another passage from your latest 823-page schizophrenic volume that just goes so far beyond most literature that it's absolutely fantastic. And thank you very much.
All right.
And Travis Jeppesen from his new novel called
Settler's Landing. Yeah.
Exactly. There we go.
So like the first passage rather that I read was just kind of like setting up the book. I'm going to read from like an end passage now where they're on the island, the billionaires, and by now everything has devolved into a state of civil war. And this chapter towards the end, it's an interior monologue by the mistress of the billionaire. And as this civil war is going on the island, she's flown in a plastic surgeon to give her Botox. And so this is kind of like her interior monologue. And it's a little bit of like a piss take on the Molly Bloom monologue at the end of Ulysses by James Joyce, for those of you who read that. But
those of you who could suffer through it.
Yeah. And so she's thinking as she's getting Botox, this is her interior monologue about like what her next station in life is going to be doing this reality TV show, like, all these things. So I'll read a little bit. This isn't written in her voice. OMFG, what was that explosion? So freaking loud. I am shaking. Thank God, not a needle in my face when that happened. It sounded like a bomb. I swear to God, we're all going to be so triggered by this. By the time it finally finishes, I mean, not just soldiers can get PTSD, civilians also. Glamour in a war zone. Maybe that would be a good title for the reality show, or just Warzone Glamour. And it could be me doing the voiceover during the opening sequence. Like in life, like in life, beauty thrives, even in the most unexpected of places. But nobody said it would be easy. Let me be your guide. An animated rain of bullets, me in a bikini, Emporio Armani, of course. Then there could be me in like a cute nurse's outfit, caring for our wounded soldiers, or like giving them skincare tips. Because even if you're an amputee or something, no matter how bad your wound happens to be, you can still take care of your skin. That's my philosophy or motto or whatever it's called. Like anyone can take care of themselves. I have to think about when the next procedure on my butt will be, whether I should just get implants or keep going on with injectables. Butt was my first big procedure, even before I got anything done in the face. Desiree's advice it was, but also that I got that plastic surgery reality show where the girl was like, there's a revolution in beauty that's going right into my booty. I just thought that was so cute. I was like, yes, sister, I am with you. And truthfully, I haven't looked back since. No need to keep looking better and better. Like if I wind up winning an Emmy or something for the reality show, like the first person I will thank in my acceptance speech will be Dr. Slopovsky, even ahead of Murdoch. No, that's not true. Don't get carried away, Bev. Everybody in LA goes to him. Then they totally know you've had work done. Not that it's anything to be ashamed of. Still, I mean, I'm pretty sure they all go to him. All the big name actresses and stuff. Not that he's ever told me. Client-patient confidentiality or whatever it's called. But still, you hear things. There's always rumors. I mean, that's how these surgeons survive. The industry is tough. You get recommendations direct from friends who look good good, whose opinions you respect on the one hand, and then there's the rumor mill where it's like so-and-so goes to this one, and so then of course you want to look like her, and so you go. I mean, true happiness is looking your best and saying fuck the rest. That should be my motto. I mean, I could really have one for my Twitter bio line, one for my Insta, another for my TikTok. Now they're all the same. And I mean, on the one hand, it makes sense for establishing a brand, but then it makes it all a little bland. Hey, I made a rhyme. There, I should be a poet. LOL. Yeah.
That was Travis Jeppesen from his new book, which is 823 glorious pages of capsule schizophrenic insanity, Settler's Landing. And this is The Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl.
Thank you so much, Travis.